Dr. Brzezinski, last night we were at the Atlantic Council's gala.
That's lovely.
It was a lot of foreign policy leaders there. Can you talk a little bit about your reflections 20 years after the fall of the wall?
Well, of course, the celebration in part was for George Bush, the senior, who was the main architect of a very successfully conducted termination of the Cold War, a victory, but peaceful and cleverly constructed. And it was to honor Chancellor Helmut Kohl of Germany, who was the most important European in the process. And Kohl was responsible for insisting that Germany be truly reunified and not in some special limbo status, that it remained part of NATO. That's very important. And Kohl did something that was absolutely critical to ending what I call the European Civil War. Namely, he promoted then German-Polish reconciliation, the way his predecessor some years earlier, Adenauer, promoted Franco-German reconciliation. And these two reconciliations have created the basis, the ethnic solidarity basis for a united Europe.
What I didn't realize was, until recently, that the French and the British were actually opposed to German reunification. And
yes.
It was Bush that pushed for it.
Well, there was a very good line cited last night at dinner, that when the issue of German reunification came up and Bush was talking with Mitterrand and Thatcher about it and so forth, both of them reacted the same way. We love Germany so much, we prefer two Germanys to one.
Let's talk about Pakistan. Obviously, we had an interview before with General Petraeus, who has a connection with you that I found out last night. Young General Petraeus wanted, when he was at Princeton, wanted to be your father's aide.
And he told us that story while I was playing the role of makeup artist for you too.
Exactly.
I see.
Exactly. So now you know. But you had actually, General Petraeus had wanted to be your aide, and you'd shared a car trip with him.
He was terrific. He is terrific. He's very able. He's a good general, but at the risk of going out on a limb, I think he still has another career ahead of him.
I think he may too.
And what we saw last night might be a preview of something we may be watching in 2012. At the latest, 2016.
Perhaps.
Perhaps.
Perhaps. Let's talk about Pakistan.
Especially for a party that doesn't have anybody.
Yeah, absolutely nobody. Let's talk about Pakistan. Right now, that's what the general's concerned about. How dire is the situation in that country?
I think it's quite dire because it really is not yet a genuinely united, self-conscious nation. It's an amalgam of entities. There's only one national institution in the country, and that's the army. The political parties are personal fiefdoms, family structures. Identities are based more in regions, whether it's Punjab or Pashtun or the others. They're beleaguered in their attitude, and they feel that India is pressing them. They may be exaggerating India's threat, but that's the way they feel. They want desperately some sense that Afghanistan, in their back, is part of their geostrategic depth vis-a-vis India. They're not quite sure whether we agree with that, but they know that we want them to do a job on our behalf in dealing with Al-Qaeda and Taliban. And as a consequence, I personally feel that as of now, we have a policy for Afghanistan, which the president has formulated, a more intelligent political military strategy. I'm not sure we yet have a policy for Pakistan. That is to say, how do we really get the Pakistanis to do what we need to have done, and what are we prepared to pay for it? And that's not just money.
Well, Americans are usually repelled by militaries taking over governments. Is it not true that the Pakistani army may be the one unifying force in that country?
Well, that's precisely what I was hinting at. You're absolutely right. It's not a question, in my judgment, of reforming Pakistan and creating democracy. I was very skeptical of the partially U.S.-sponsored initiative to push Benazir Bhutto back into Pakistan, into what inevitably had to be a confrontation between her and Musharraf. And my prediction at the time was that one of them would be dead in the end. It doesn't help to sort of destabilize a country politically unless you know what you're going to follow it up with. And that's what we have been doing.
Pat Buchanan.
You mentioned destabilize. We're using these predator strikes in Pakistan in the federally administrated tribal areas. And they are killing al-Qaeda, clearly, and now they want us apparently to use them in Baluchistan in the south. Do you think we are, I mean, clearly we're killing the enemy, but on net, are they beneficial, or are they making more enemies for us in Pakistan than any gain we're conceivably getting by taking down these al-Qaeda types?
You know, there's no easy way of answering one way or the other. It's a little bit of both. In some instances, there's no doubt we kill important, very dangerous people, al-Qaeda types, or some extremist Taliban types. But much too often, we kill innocents, so-called collateral damage. And that's creating real animus, anti-American animus. Today, we have much more support, public support, in Afghanistan, among the Afghans, because we helped them against the Soviets, than we have in Pakistan. In Pakistan, there's much more anti-Americanism. And every time we kill some innocents, that intensifies. So I would be much more cautious. I wouldn't categorically say, don't do it ever, but be more precise, more restrained. Don't do it unless you're absolutely certain that the payoff is high.
Let's go from Pakistan to Iran. You have been speaking you had an interview, I believe, with
Yeah, it's rather surprising. No, it's Tehran Television.
Tehran
Television.
Television.
Full-scale interview with me, about half an hour.
How fascinating. How did that come about?
They said, would you be willing? Well, actually, they approached me and said, would you be willing to appear with a senior government official to discuss policy? And I said, well, first of all, you know, I'm not a policymaker, I'm a private citizen. But secondly, I don't want to get into a hassle. Mutual accusations, counter-accusations. If you interview me and let me lay out my point of view, how I think the issue ought to be approached, then after that, I'll be happy to talk on TV with some official, having established a baseline. Namely, how do we conduct the negotiations? My point being, let's not start with the accusations. Let's not start with refighting history. We overthrew Mossadegh. They imprisoned our diplomats. And, you know, how productive is that? And they agreed to that. And I have to say, not one word was changed, 27-minute-long interview, and leading newspapers then published it in full. It's just within the last few days.
Are you hopeful that we're moving in the right direction with Iran in the new administration?
I think the president wants to move in the right direction, and he wants negotiations. I'm still concerned that there are some other people who may want to move forward with negotiations which are structured in such a way that they're doomed to fail. You know, negotiations, you go in them wanting to achieve a compromise, or you go into them wanting to stigmatize your other side as recalcitrant, unyielding, and responsible for the eventual failure of the negotiations.
And who are those forces that want to go in making demands that they know won't be met?
Oh, you know, there may be individuals or there may be just attitudes, but the point is you hear periodically there has to be a time limit on them. If you set the time limit, you're already likely to fail. We have to threaten them before we start, so they know they have to compromise. If you start threatening, you get the extremists stronger on the other side. You have to sort of remind them of their misconduct, terrorism, crime, this or that. In other words, you create a pattern which makes negotiations successfully concluded unlikely.
What do you think of this proposal now suddenly up in Congress to cut off all gasoline exports to Iran, which they depend on for 40% of their gasoline? It is moving like wildfire through the Congress of the United States. They say we want to give Barack Obama a weapon.
Well, that's exactly a good example. It's one of those helpful initiatives designed to screw things up.
Wow.
Let's talk about Afghanistan, something else that we spoke with General Petraeus about last night. President Obama is funding the war effort, and it seems that most Democrats and Republicans are willing to move along with that. If we continue moving this direction, doesn't that guarantee the United States of America and our troops having a presence in Afghanistan for the foreseeable future, possibly a decade?
You say foreseeable. That all depends on how far you foresee. You may be right.
10 years.
No, I'm afraid of that, and it certainly is. And I think he does have a plan for Afghanistan. The problem is that Afghanistan and Pakistan are linked together, are joined at the hip.
Right.
And now increasingly the problem is a longer-term problem with Pakistan, where we have to do two things that are almost contradictory. One is avoid getting too drawn into internal Pakistani affairs and fights, and yet on the other hand we have to make certain that the Pakistanis make a full-scale effort to help us in Afghanistan. And then the question arises, what's the trade-off? How do we get them to do that? And the only instrument that can do that is the army.
Well, Dad, thanks for being here.
That was very nice, and I thought the two of you did great.
Oh, yes.
A tough ground.